Hey, good day to you. Welcome to the Saturday edition of RFD Illinois. I'm Rita Frazier here at the Illinois Farm Bureau in Bloomington. Well, I know the forecast isn't what you want to hear for sure, but we do have some news, and hopefully we will do some entertaining as well. We will have to focus on the markets and the weather, unfortunately, at the end of the program, but it's from the very best. Joe Camp from Agrivisor Services, and we'll also be visited by the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana with their weekly summary. And yes, rain in the forecast, but we do have some hopes. We're crossing our fingers for more progress towards the trade talks and et cetera that could hopefully help us out a little bit. So Matt Kay, Washington correspondent, joined us in the first segment. He will talk about a couple of different issues, U.S.-Japan talks, potential on China trade with the U.S., and he'll also talk about what's going to happen, perhaps, the philosophy on the disaster aid bill. Where might that go when Congress goes back to town next week? Let's talk horses. Jason Vance is along with another entertaining program, and we'll take a look at the global market outlook with the guys from Chicago in their weekly update. All that coming your way on this edition of RFD Illinois. Stay with us.
Comes to social media, Sabrina Berkowitz connects rural routes for you. Sabrina covers a broad range of ag topics, so Farm Bureau members are the first to know about key issues. Here's a bit about her rural roots.
I grew up with a grain and livestock farm in my extended family, and today I really enjoy helping people learn how to use social media to advocate for agriculture.
Be it routes or roots, RFD Radio, FarmWeekNow.com, and Farm Week keep you connected.
I'm Trooper Teal with Illinois State Police. As we enter spring planting season in Illinois, it is imperative to eliminate distractions in your vehicle and pay attention to the farm equipment on the roadway. At 55 miles per hour, it takes only 5 seconds to close the gap the length of a football field between you and a tractor moving 5 miles per hour. Distracted Driving Awareness Month in April is a united effort to recognize and eliminate preventable deaths from distracted driving. Join us to help save lives.
A message from the Illinois Farm Bureau and the Illinois State Police.
Welcome back to RFD Illinois. On a Saturday, we check in with Matt Kay in the nation's capital and Congress out, but no lack of news. You tell us that as we close in, hopefully, on a deal with China on that trade dispute, Japan and the U.S. talks continue.
Yeah, this is big for U.S. farmers, Rita, who are just itching for a quick deal with Japan. Secretary Perdue has suggested that there will be an acceleration of talks on agriculture. 90 farm groups told U.S. Trade Ambassador Robert Lighthizer this past week that U.S. farm products are losing ground in Japan, which cut tariffs for a second time on products from other Asian Pacific nations that did their own TPP deal that the U.S. pulled out of. The European Union also has a deal with Japan. Australia also has a deal. And all of these countries are gaining on the U.S. because they're getting reduced tariffs, and the U.S. is still stuck at its old tariff rates in Japan. So there's a push by the Trump administration. U.S. and Japanese negotiators were holding a second round of trade talks here this week, and Japan's prime minister was meeting with the president at the White House, all in this effort to push for a trade deal and one that will address in the short term agriculture and automobiles. The Japanese are trying to avoid increased tariffs that would threaten their auto sales in the U.S. They also want to get rid of the steel and aluminum tariffs that President Trump had implemented against Japanese steel, and this is all part of the negotiations which hopefully both sides want to see conclude very quickly. Whether that will happen sooner than a deal with China, no one seems to know at this point. The Japanese may be looking over their shoulder to see what the Chinese get, but certainly we see that there is a strong push now to conclude something. And you have to remember, Rita, a lot of the legwork was already done with Japan and the TPP, but the trick for U.S. negotiators will be to get into the Japanese market with a deal that replicates what our trade competitors have there. In other words, we don't want to start out at a higher tariff rate than the Europeans and the other Asian nations already have. We want to get in at that same rate that they currently have, whether that happens in May, June, July, whenever it happens. We don't want to be having to play catch-up with the other countries, particularly when it comes to very important commodities in Japan like pork.
So the other issue, as you mentioned, the question mark, when Congress gets back next week, where does disaster aid stand?
Yeah, the issue of getting the disaster aid bill done is running headlong into politics here on the Hill, Rita. Particularly now that the Mueller report is out. The Democrats are debating whether to try to impeach the president, and you've got a bunch of subpoenas out there by congressional committees that are looking for testimony by present and former White House aides, and the president is saying no to those subpoenas, and in some cases may declare executive privilege. So whether things get any better in this toxic political environment is highly questionable. The House and Senate are back this coming week. They are still dealing with big legislative questions like $13 billion in disaster assistance. That would include at least $5 billion in ag disaster aid. We know that there has been at least $3 billion or more in the damage from Midwest flooding. Agriculture has lost significant amount of value in that flooding. And so, farmers need to have relief, and whether they can get that relief when the two parties were already arguing before the recess about side issues like Puerto Rico and how much Puerto Rico was getting. And it just seems like a very heavy lift in this political climate to pass that legislation. The House has passed it, but the Senate Democrats and Republicans cannot agree on a disaster bill, and whether they can do that now is, again, as I said, highly questionable.
Matt, as always, appreciate your coverage. Matt Kay, in the nation's capital, RFD Washington correspondent. We'll be back with more RFD Illinois.
You're going to need me.
You're going to need us.
All of us.
You're going to need our help with your water, your air, your food.
You're going to need our determination, our compassion.
You're going to need the next generation of leaders to face the challenges the future will bring.
And we promise we'll be there when you need us.
Today, 4-H is growing the next generation of leaders. Support us at 4h.org.
Are you preparing for planting season? We don't mean to be a pest, but here's a few things you need to know before you grow. The Illinois Department of Agriculture now requires special local needs labels, including new restrictions for the use of herbicide dicamba on top of soybeans in Illinois for the 2019 growing season. Did you know these additional restrictions go beyond federally approved labels? Remember, the label is the law. To find out more about these Illinois-specific labels, visit ilfb.org/label-aware.
Hello, America, and welcome to the AgResource Global Ag Update, brought to you by Bayer. I'm Ben Buckner. It's the fourth week of April. Brazilian analyst Tarso Veloso joins us once again from Brazil, and as usual, we'll get to the details after a quick message.
When you think of Palmer amaranth, water hemp, ragweed, and mare's tail, doesn't it just make you want to give them the pounding they deserve? Now you can with Diflex Duo herbicide. It's the post-emergence corn herbicide with 2 proven sites of action. So you get powerful control of the toughest weeds, built-in resistance management, and excellent crop safety. So don't just hit weeds. Pound them like never before with Diflex Duo. Learn more at diflexduo.us. Always read and follow label instructions.
World grain and oilseed markets are down this week, sharply so in wheat. The world's cheapest wheat is the U.S. for old crop, but Russian for new crop, which is trading equivalent to about $4 basis July, Kansas City. Argentina holds the world's cheapest corn at $3.85 a bushel for export. Argentina also holds the world's cheapest soybeans at $8.41 a bushel. South American crops have gotten bigger and are now priced to sell. What else is new in South America, Tarso?
With the soybean crop in Brazil done, Farmers are now waiting to harvest a possible record safrinha at almost 70 million metric tons, with a total corn crop this year of 98 million metric tons. The weather has been good and prices are inching lower on the heavy supply, and South American corn is now offered well below the U.S. into August. Truck drivers were threatening to strike again in Brazil due to high diesel rates. This time, the Brazilian government was able to avoid a new strike, promising more credit and to maintain the minimum freight rates, but the equation is not solved yet.
Another issue this week has also been the U.S. dollar, which has found a new 22-month high. This is keeping supply in other major exporting countries much more competitive on the world market. We are a bit concerned that funds are excessively short ahead of a growing season, but the spark that's needed to cover this position is lacking. Again, this is Ben Buckner wishing you a successful week. This report is being brought to you by Bayer.
This is Let's Talk Horses on the RFD Radio Network. I'm Jason Vance. Joining me is Denise Ferris, one of the country's leading horse attorneys. Today we're going to visit about sales fraud in the horse industry. And Denise, what are some of the types of sales fraud that can be seen with horses?
You normally will see sales fraud arising in three circumstances. One would be what we call fraudulent or intentional misrepresentation, where the seller specifically fails to disclose relevant information to the buyer that they know is very important in that transaction. The second would be negligent misrepresentation, which means that the seller knew or should have known that particular information was important and either misrepresented it or failed to disclose that to the buyer. The third area, which is getting a lot more attention now, is the issue of commission agents, trainers, or third parties within the transaction that failed to disclose that they may be representing both parties at the same time and or the amount of commissions that they're receiving on those sales.
So does the old adage, the buyer beware, apply to the sale of a horse?
To a large extent, it still does apply, Jason. It entails that the buyer should do its own due diligence and have a list of pertinent questions and have that in writing along with the contract. That said, there still is a trend that is maximizing the obligations on the part of a seller to be truthful as long as they know information that goes directly to how that horse is going to be used.
Now, what are the legal rights of a buyer and a seller in a horse sale transaction?
The buyer and the seller are both going to want to have contracts drafted that protect their specific interest. The seller obviously is going to want to sell as is to the greatest extent possible. The buyer is going to want to have the maximum number of warranties and protections. So a good contract is important. If the sale goes bad, the parties also want to think about having an arbitration and a recovery of attorney's fees clause that allows them to get into court and get it resolved much quicker. The causes of action would be breach of contract, misrepresentation, and breach of warranty. In some instances, the contract could also be a breach of fiduciary duty, particularly where you have a sales agent that's supposed to be working in your best interest.
Now, what can be done to avoid disputes and lawsuits when buying or selling horses?
Having very clear written communications back and forth, having very clear terms and conditions in terms of what each party's respective rights are, and having that important arbitration clause which allows you to get in before an arbitrator and get it resolved very quickly and with the minimal cost of legal fees.
What are some of the other aspects of buying and selling horses that should be considered to try and avoid a problem? I
think, again, you want to concentrate on the level of sophistication of the parties that are involved. If you are a seller and you know that the person buying the horse is buying it for a youth or a child, you've got a higher duty to disclose any information that would show that that horse might be inappropriate or unsafe. Conversely, if you're dealing with people that are very sophisticated in the industry and have done a lot of these agreements back and forth, then there's the presumption that each party comes to the table as a sophisticated buyer-seller, and it's not quite as important to do that level of disclosure.
You mentioned a little bit about some of the aspects of a third-party agent and some of the legal possibilities with that. What exactly is going on with that?
Well, as anyone who's been involved with a third-party agent's involvement, it can get very irritating to you if you find out that your agent is also representing the other party to the transaction. However, in the past, that's been very common in the horse industry, where an agent is going to be representing and being paid a commission by both the buyer and the seller. It's become a big enough problem that at least 3 states have now enacted statutes that make it mandatory for an agent to disclose in writing their role in the transaction and to identify the amount of commission that they're receiving. Those states are California, Florida, and Kentucky, and I'm going to expect that trend to probably continue to increase to ultimately include the majority of the states.
Well, Denise, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. Always a pleasure.
That's Denise Ferris of the Ferris Law Firm. She's been our guest on Let's Talk Horses. Thanks for listening, and tune in again next week for another edition of Let's Talk Horses.
For University of Illinois Extension, I'm Todd Gleason. The weather is next.
From the State Climatologist Office for the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois Prairie Research Institute, this is Brian Kirshner. Last weekend and earlier this week, a majority of the state enjoyed a brief, welcome period of unseasonably warm weather and relatively drier conditions. On Sunday and Monday, numerous weather stations as far north as Rockford reported readings of 80 or higher, many for the first time this year. With the last week of April underway, month-to-date statewide temperature departures are near to a degree or two above average, while month-to-date percent of normal precipitation south of I-72 is 100 to 150% of average and near to slightly below average to the north and west. Unfortunately, a return to an active weather pattern is expected as we head into May. The Climate Prediction Center's 6 to 10-day outlook is favoring moderate probabilities of wetter than average conditions statewide. Precipitation totals from the National Weather Service forecast an additional 1 to 3 inches over the next 7 days, with the heaviest amounts occurring in western and central Illinois. A low-pressure system will approach the state from the west this weekend, bringing wind and widespread showers and storms starting Saturday morning. The greatest impacts will occur north of I-74, and for localities in extreme northern Illinois, it may be cool enough to support a mix with snow. Temperatures this weekend are forecast to remain on the cool side, especially as you head north, with statewide lows generally in the 30s and 40s. This is Brian Kirshner from the State Climatologist Office.
And I'm Todd Gleason for ULI Extension. You have a great and a very safe week.
Time to look at your closing numbers on a Friday, a mixed day at that. Joe Camp at Agrivisor Services here to tell us and summarize, really, the week.
Yeah, mixed on Friday because we had corn futures higher and soybeans lower. We had some intercommodity spreading there, maybe in terms of our expectations on weather and how those are influencing the market. This idea that we could have some more soybean acres at the expense of corn if we continue to face planting delays because of the wet weather. We go into the weekend with a wet forecast. We'll see what kind of storms move through the Corn Belt over this weekend here. Looks like there could be even some snow in the northern Midwest and northern plains. That would certainly be unseasonable and cause further delay here. It'll be the crop progress reports that we get out each Monday over the next several weeks that are heavily scrutinized to see just how far back we do fall here, because concerns aren't overly impacting the market at this point. We don't see a whole lot of weather risk premium, not certainly after last week when you had futures reach new contract lows. So still a bearish market, not a lot of weather bullishness, but that could change quickly again as we progress into the real thick of the Midwest planting season, or at least what's supposed to be the thick of the Midwest planting season. Other than weather, it's all about Washington, particularly as it regards our negotiations with the Chinese on trade. Here in the upcoming fresh week, we'll have face-to-face meetings resume. Those will take place in Beijing, to be followed up by a meeting in the U.S., Washington. Will host the Chinese delegation. We had comments from President Trump late last week that indicated he is preparing for a summit between himself and Chinese President Xi. That would happen at the White House, hopefully by the end of May. That's been some of the rough projections for when that meeting will have. If we have a Chinese trade deal, maybe we're looking at a different type of market.
For Illinois agricultural leaders, or those who want to be one, this is the week's Best of Leader page from the Illinois Farm Bureau. I'm Rachel Torbert. A group of 16 Illinois ag organizations and agencies, including the Illinois Farm Bureau, have teamed up to help the monarch butterfly survive, unveiling a 20-year action plan on Earth Day at the IDOA. The plan, more than 2 years in the making, calls for adding 150 million more milkweed stems and working closely with farmers, teachers, and students to raise awareness. Walmart has partnered with the Texas cattle rancher and other industry-related businesses to provide Angus beef to 500 of its U.S. stores beginning later this year. The move will allow the nation's largest grocer to ensure supplies of quality Angus beef and meet demands from customers who want to know the origin of their meat. It also will partially remove suppliers like Tyson Foods from its beef supply chain. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue is moving forward with plans to relocate USDA's Economic Research Service and National Institute of Food and Agriculture divisions outside of Washington, D.C. The plan has drawn sharp criticism from lawmakers and USDA employees who fear the move would cause the agency to lose additional staff on top of employees already leaving because of budget cuts. March's flooding in the Midwest continues to deal farmers blow after blow, this time stalling fertilizer and other inputs because of shuttered locks and dams and damaged railroads. Our barges are a long way from where we need them in the upper Midwest, said Gary Halverson, Senior Vice President of Agronomy for CHS. We really don't think that any rail line will be at their preferred service rate until summer. The USDA has paid farmers $8.39 billion of the estimated $9.56 billion it promised in December to offset China trade war losses, but no similar aid has budgeted for this year. The majority of the market facilitation program payments went to soybean growers who were most severely impacted by China's retaliatory tariffs. That's the Best of Leader page for this week. You can receive an electronic version of Leader Page Monday through Friday. Just go to farmweeknow.com, click the banner, and sign up to receive the farmweeknow.com daily update, which contains the daily edition of the Illinois Farm Bureau Leader Page.
Hey, that's all the time we have for this edition of RFD Illinois. Thanks for spending some time with us, and we always salute an Illinois town or community. We're going to say hello to those in Greenville in Bond County, population 7,000. The salute brought to you by Country. Your farm is your family's legacy and a part of your hometown heritage. While you work sun up to sundown to get that job done, they're here protecting the things you love every step of the way. Country Financial. Learn more by visiting countrycrop.com. For the entire RFD radio team, I'm Rita Frazier. Have a good weekend.